Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a lovely weekend. I have been wanting to make this video for absolutely ages, but I just haven't had the energy recently. The third trimester of a twin pregnancy is honestly no joke. I feel fecking exhausted all the time and I have energy for nothing most days. But this morning I have set myself up with an array of hot and cold drinks. I'm on my pregnancy ball, and so I thought it was a good time to take you through some more styling tips, tricks, just indoor planty things, trends that I have stumbled across and absolutely love. But first, if you're new here, hi, my name's Claire and this is Yoli. I make videos all about houseplant care, sharing tips and tricks I've learnt over the years to help keep your plants happy and healthy. And yeah, I made a video very similar in style to this one towards the end of last year, which I will link down below, which you guys seem to enjoy. And I just had so many things that I discovered whilst I was researching for that video that I didn't get to include. So that is what you are seeing today. So yes, I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. So in a very similar way to how I did last time, I've made several Pinterest boards for this video. I have kind of curated lots of ideas that I absolutely love so that you can see what I'm talking about. I'll be including lots of pictures and videos and stuff like that on the screen as we go through, but I will also link all of the Pinterest boards with all of the original creators down below. So yes, I'm going to shuffle over on my ball and then I will put everything on the screen there so that you can see it. But these are in no particular order. And the first one I have got on here is styling your staircase. And this might initially seem like a really impractical thing. I think this firstly very much depends on the type of staircase you have. When I was looking on Pinterest, I could see some people have these amazing wide staircases. And honestly, a staircase, unless you have like a beautiful spiral staircase or something, is often just a practical, very man-made looking thing, isn't it? It doesn't look particularly nice. It's purely functional. And I think just adding some plants along the side and breaking up that man-made-ness with some naturalistic elements, it kind of just helps to soften it. And actually, when I was looking it up, there's a term for repeating elements that guide your gaze through a space in interior design, and it's known as vertical rhythm. And just looking at some of the pictures I've got here, you can totally see that. And it's actually something that you do see used outdoors quite a lot. And something that I really love doing with plant styling is just kind of taking outdoor elements and bringing them indoors, whether that's looking at garden spaces or a rainforest and letting that kind of influence your styling. But yeah, like if you've got a garden similar to mine that is quite kind of steeped and perhaps has lots of levels, you often see plants on steps or little hooks into nooks and crannies with plants kind of trailing down. And I always think that looks really lovely. And there is no reason at all that you can't mimic that in your indoor space. I think as well, because it kind of draws your gaze upward, it almost kind of mimics a living wall or an indoor terrace. I've seen some people kind of wrapping plants around the balustrades or like banisters of their staircase as well, to again kind of mimic that indoor trellis. And it actually can make your ceilings feel higher. So if you want to cheat the space a little bit, perhaps you've got, I don't know, a stairwell that feels quite cramped and you want to make it a little bit more airy. If you've got width but not height, adding some plants going up can actually give the illusion of that space being a lot taller than it is. Obviously, this is such an obvious, but firstly, it can be a trip hazard. So I would only recommend doing it in the way that we are looking at here if you have got a very wide staircase and you're able to actually kind of see going up and down quite well. It's quite well lit. Obviously as well, if you've got pets, if you've got children, we're talking about having plants very close to ground level or on ground level, in fact. So you do need to think about the toxicity of these plants and how dangerous it might be. Like, for example, if a plant was to get kicked, would it fly off? Would it hurt someone? There's lots of practicalities, and I know some of these pictures just are not practical. They're certainly not practical for my house, despite the fact that they look really lovely. But there are some ways that you can take this technique, this style, and make it a little bit more practical. Like, for example, in the last video I made like this, we spoke a lot about gallery walls, and I'm looking at some of the pictures here and seeing kind of wall planters and gallery wall type things going up the staircase that obviously are raised off the floor, so eliminating that hazard. Obviously, with hanging plants, you can keep plants that aren't pet safe, child safe. You can keep them in hangers away from ground level as well. So it's a much more practical solution and also looks really beautiful. It's something you really don't see done very often. And I think as planty people, obviously, a lot of the time we want to optimize all of the space we've got. And the staircase is one that just kind of gets forgotten about. So I would encourage you, if you've got the ability to be able to do it, to add a little bit of greenery to that area of your house. I think the reason that a lot of people perhaps don't do this, besides what we've already discussed, is the fact that obviously lighting can be an issue. You really need to think about the individual plant's needs that you're going to use for stuff like this. In lots of the pictures that I can see here, I can see lots of Sansevieria snake plants, golden pothos, stuff like that. And these are very, very hardy plants that will typically grow well in lower levels of light. But before you go planting loads of beautiful things into this incredible stairwell arrangement, it's obviously just worth making sure that they are actually going to survive there. But again, on a more practical note of making something like this work, I found an image here that I'll put on the screen that I absolutely love, where someone has actually done this, but they've used planters on the outside of their banisters. And currently I don't have balustrades kind of going up my staircase. I've got just like a plank of wood, and at some point, in the name of childproofing, if nothing else, we will be getting banisters. And this is something that when the time comes, I am very keen to do, because I think it looks lovely, but obviously it completely eliminates that trip hazard because you're working on the outside as opposed to the inside of the staircase. You do need to still probably be a little bit wary about children putting their hands through, and pets, if your pets are interested in plants. I know some couldn't care less, but it is obviously something to take into consideration. So again, like things like spider plants, there's just looking at non-toxic plants on ground level, I think is always a good idea if you've got any concern at all. Again, I have made videos about non-toxic plants and some of the types that might work for you, so I will link that down below. And I will also, I'm sure, be making more content on that soon as my babies arrive, because that's something that I am going to have to massively think about that I just haven't really had to up until this point, because obviously I've got Yoli, my dog, but she has no interest in the plants, and I've been really lucky. But children are a little more unpredictable, I think. But yeah, coming back to the staircase styling, obviously you have to really, with all of these, you have to really, really tailor them to your space based on the conditions you've got. Think about heat, think about light, think about all of the things that you would think about when placing a plant anywhere, and the hardiness of the plant and how much you're actually prepared to do to care for a plant in that area, because doing a load of plant care on your stairs is probably not the most practical thing. I'm like, for example, I might not choose to have calatheas and alocasias and plants that need a lot of water on my staircase, because I feel like it would just be a little bit impractical. But then just some more styling things on that note. I think what looks really, really lovely, and I can see it in some of the pictures and videos that I've seen on Pinterest, is matching your pots to your home decor. Because again, the staircase is an area of your home that a lot of the time can get very neglected when it comes to styling. I know lots of people have kind of big gallery walls and stuff like that going up your staircase, but my staircase currently is the blandest area of my house. There is nothing that gives it any personality. And greenery is lovely, but also kind of, for example, if you've got a wooden staircase, choosing some natural elements to feed into your plant pots, or choosing a colour scheme to kind of run up that staircase would just really help to just make it a little bit more personal. As well as obviously variety in foliage, and texture is something that I always bang on about. It's something that I love passionately in my plant collection. And this always very much feeds into things when you're thinking about interior design with plants, because variety in a way that doesn't feel cluttered, I think a lot of the time is what a lot of us hope to achieve. And when I look at pictures of staircases styled beautifully, I see like a spider plant, a caladium, I see like all of these different types of greenery. It doesn't have to be green, of course, you could go multicoloured, but different types of greenery with different shades and different textures and all of these things that just add interest and make it feel put together, but also natural and kind of jungly and not too perfect and staged, you know? And on that note as well, what I think is quite nice is having a variety of kind of upright plants and trailing plants. So, for example, you might choose to have a stretch of lucky bamboo or something going up one of your balustrades and then a pothos trailing down just after that. And I think just having that variety, again, just makes it feel really interesting. So yeah, I am very excited to play about with this myself at some point. And then this next one is using wood and other natural materials to kind of just feel like an extension of your plant collection, which might sound weird, but I'll put some pictures on the screen of people that have used things like driftwood and stuff like that as stakes, as trellises, instead of using moss poles, and you'll see what I mean. It almost feels like that is just part of the plant. And again, there is an interior design term for this that I learned as I was researching this video called material affinity, which is the idea that the object which shares a common origin feels like they belong together. And I think obviously when you bring plants into your collection, you I love just like the natural element, feeling like I'm bringing the outdoors in, the jungliness of everything. And then often when you pair that with a plastic moss pole or a plastic nursery pot or something that just, it just kind of takes you out of it a little bit. So when we think about styling, using those natural materials to just heighten your plants actually almost allows you to appreciate your plants in a whole new way. And it doesn't have to be anything as extravagant as like big pieces of driftwood or anything like that. There's loads of ideas that I will share with you, but things like that, although they're lovely, I realise they're not always the most practical. It can just be as simple as like using wooden shelves or using a little wooden stool or something like that to raise your plants up. It almost just feels like that is part of the plant itself. And I think the great thing about this is that, again, it isn't something that needs to be perfect. And in fact, kind of getting away from the man-made kind of perfectness is almost what getting back to nature is all about. So kind of embracing that, like go out for a dog walk and pick up a weird piece of wood you find there and turn that into something amazing for your plants. Kind of forage for the things that can help to support your plants. As I say, these driftwood ideas that I've seen are absolutely beautiful. But also when I go out walking in the woods with Yoli, I frequently see fallen branches and stuff like that. And although currently I don't have the energy to be trailing them back with me, at some point I would like to think that doing kind of a big DIY or something like that. I've talked about it, in fact, so many times over the years in different spaces I've been in, but to be able to kind of have going up and round the ceiling in this space, for example, and then training things like my Rhaphidophora tetrasperma that is currently just going around the edge of this room to climb up over it, I think that would just look beautiful. And it's also probably another way to kind of trick your brain into thinking that you've got more plants than you do, because again, I have made videos on this before. A lot of the time we want to have really, really planty homes and really planty spaces, and we want people to walk in and be like, oh my God, it's such a cool jungle. But the reality of that is that keeping on top of 500 plants is not always practical with jobs and life and pets and children and everything else that goes on. So yeah, actually using a little bit of trickery in your collection to make it feel much fuller than it actually is great. And I think this is something that can definitely be optimized. And one of the ideas that I saw here that I loved was someone had used pieces of either branches or driftwood to just create like a little stand for their grow lights. And again, grow lights typically are not the most beautiful of things. They often look, I mean, of course they do, they look very man-made because they are very man-made. But using that to kind of just wrap the wire around, I thought just made it look like, I mean, almost like a beautiful art installation, you know? It looks far more natural and less placed than it would do if you kind of mounted something to the wall, which is currently what I'm doing in my collection. And it's practical, it keeps my plants happy. Do I love it? No. But just looking at things like that, I'm like, actually, that feels very doable. And of course, you don't just have to do it for trellising. Like there's other plant accessory ideas like plant stands. I can see like just some gorgeous tree stumps that have been used as plant stands here. And again, obviously, I mean, this looks so high quality, doesn't it? It looks like something that has been lifted out of like an interior design magazine or something. But again, it's pretty easy to get hold of a tree stump. Like you could get a tree stump, you could clean it up yourself if you wanted to kind of sand it down a little bit, maybe varnish it. Like it's kind of a fun and very easy DIY project that looks so beautiful. In fact, I think these ones might even be hollowed out and turned into planters. If you're feeling very creative, you could totally do that. I think I'd probably, with my DIY ability, I think I'd probably stick to stools and stands. But yeah, they look gorgeous. There's also been some other planters that I've seen that have been made out of wood and have, again, just been hollowed out, and they look so pretty. And then again, just this weird piece of wood mounted on the wall with tillandsias, air plants, kind of stuck all over it. Again, I think just looks like a really gorgeous piece of art. Like it doesn't look like you've just stuck plants to the wall. It looks very intentional, but it also, I think like the weirdness of the wood makes it look arty. I can't think of a better word than arty. But yeah, I think just like pieces like that are interesting and capture your eye or certainly when I'm in someone else's space, those are the things that I'm often very, very drawn to, because in, again, like modern society, we are very used to like flat pack furniture and perfectly framed pictures and posters on the walls, and there's nothing wrong with that. Of course there's nothing wrong with that, but I actually think just kind of returning a little bit to the natural elements and embracing the fact that something is a little bit wonky or a little bit weird, it gives it more of kind of a cozy, homey, natural, interesting feel. And I really love that. I really, really love that. And obviously it doesn't just have to apply to wood as well. I spoke about natural elements, things like slate, things like stone. I used to revamp, I haven't actually done it in a while, but just because I haven't massively expanded my plant collection. But I used to revamp a lot of my own plant pots using like macrame cord, which feels very like natural fibre-esque. And then I'd sometimes stick little bits of twigs, just things that I'd foraged onto the plants, or dried leaves, stuff like that, to kind of give it a really natural vibe. And it just works really well. It feels effortless. It feels like it fits in nicely to everything kind of cohesively. But again, that cost me probably all of £1 to do for my glue gun. Yeah, not expensive, super easy, like a fun project to do if you've got little ones as well. I keep thinking, now that I know ours are almost here, they're kind of in their final stage of baking, I keep thinking about the things that I would like to do with my little ones to get them into nature, and kind of, obviously they don't have to be planty, they might not be planty at all, but just fun little projects. And I think things like pot making and stuff like that, supervised, will be really, really fun. So yes, again, like I've already spoken about texture, but again, I just think by doing this with your pots and kind of your stands and your trellises, again, this just adds for lots of imperfection, lots of texture, and just works against the modern day kind of characterless feel that a lot of things are made with. It's like, you know, when you see pictures on social media saying like, here's a picture of this street in the 50s and here's a picture of this street now, and you look at it then and it was really colourful and bright and inviting, and you look at it now and it's just almost a bit Black Mirror-esque. It feels very clinical, and I hope you know what I mean. But yeah, this feels like it's just really working against that and adding as much character as possible, and I think we need to embrace that and have fun with it. And again, it's another thing that you can just do and forage and figure out, and it doesn't have to be crazy expensive, which is what I love about it. This is also massively tied to a style of design that I've seen popping up recently called biophilic design. And again, I didn't know it had a name, but the whole principle of this design in, I think, interior and exterior, but focusing on interior design, is the use of natural materials with lots of greenery and everything kind of working harmoniously together to create these beautiful, beautiful spaces. I will put some pictures on the screen, you'll know exactly what I mean. You see them sometimes in, I guess, like spas would be a good example, like spas, fancy hotels that are kind of these vast spaces, but they almost feel like an indoor woodland or something like that. So it's just taking little elements of that and making it your own in your own home. And just a couple of tips to kind of help support this. The first one is, and again, this is a style thing, this isn't necessarily something I would have thought of, but when I look at the pictures that I like, I can see that it works. Is using similar warmths of wood to complement throughout your space. So it doesn't mean that everything needs to match. In fact, I definitely don't think it should all match, because that feels a bit weird if you're trying to go for something natural. But for example, if you're using a very cool toned wood, kind of sticking to that throughout the space instead of using like a really cool wood and then a really warm wood, because it might feel like they're kind of working against each other. So yeah, it just kind of helps to create that sense of harmony between the plants and between the objects you're using in your space, if you focus on like just using warm wood or just using cool wood to create a certain feel in a certain space. Personally, I think my preference is warm. I was having a look at everything that I've got in my home, and even down to like my seagrass baskets and my dining table, and I definitely think I would be more drawn to warm. But then I look at someone like my friend Emma, Good Growing, who typically, I feel like looking at her home, which is, oh my goodness, absolutely beautiful and always feels very cozy, but in a different kind of vibe way, I would say hers is much cooler. So yeah, it definitely helps to kind of create a whole sense of the space. And then just a practical planting thing is obviously to look at the types of plants that perhaps quite like growing epiphytically, which means in their natural habitats, not growing straight out of the ground. Tillandsia air plants is actually a really good example of this, the ones that I showed you mounted on the wall before, because they will naturally grow up in the air. They won't grow straight out of the ground. So you can kind of use this to mount plants onto things like pieces of wood and keep the plant really happy and also mimic exactly how it would be in its natural habitat. Most types of anthuriums are also epiphytic, and lots of orchids are epiphytic. There's loads, absolutely loads. So yeah, it's kind of clever planting that works as a style thing, but also works for the plant. And then another thing that I really love and would love to explore more in my collection at some point is water features and aquascapes. And I spoke a lot about this actually when I got back from RHS Malvern last year. I basically did a show garden, an indoor show garden at Malvern, and we won gold and best in show. It was a complete collaboration. It was not just me. But part of it was working with a guy called Ben Newell, who's Worcester Terrariums on social media. If you guys don't know him, you should absolutely go and check him out. But he helped to create loads of amazing terrarium spaces, which we will come on to in a minute, but also aquascapes. And there was some beautiful, beautiful elements that were included, both in the outdoor side that was built by Grow Tropicals and the indoor side, which was built by Ben Newell. And yeah, just kind of looking at these ideas curated on Pinterest makes me go, oh my God, it just feels so, for want of a better, like I can't think of a better way to describe it apart from kind of like emotive, tranquil. Like it feels like it brings, I guess, a sense of life to the space, which plants already do. But yeah, it just kind of builds on what we were just saying about natural materials. But looking at some of these beautiful water features, like the movement, the sound, the reflection of the water, it just feels like a little slice of life, which I think is so gorgeous. I'm also getting a little out of breath, so I need to remember to slow down as I talk. But I've obviously spoken a lot on my channel before about hydroponic growing and semi-hydroponic growing. And essentially that is all that this is. This is just building upon what we already know about hydroponics. If you've ever taken a plant cutting, like a pothos cutting, and stuck it in a jar of water and watched it root, then you have grown hydroponically. This is just taking it one step further and actually making a decision to grow something like this long term, or perhaps even just propagate in this way and enjoy it as a whole as you're doing so. But yeah, looking at these little water features here, these look like they haven't been built. These look more like shop bought ones. I might be completely wrong about that, but you often see things kind of similar to this in garden centres for sale. And a lot of the time these are like plug-in at the wall electric things that have a filtration system and will just kind of continuously run the water. But I do know there is a way, I don't know the exact way, so you'd have to Google this, but I do know there is a way to kind of siphon the water, and if you get the right balance, to be able to keep that continuous flow without any electricity at all, which is really amazing. And then obviously there's also things like still aquascapes, like for example using a fishbowl or something like that to create a beautiful, I mean, it's just one step further than propagating, isn't it? Or growing something temporarily in water. You're just adding in lots of other elements to make it a little bit more permanent. And for something like this, I think, especially if you're growing a higher light plant that needs to be closer to a light source, I think some kind of filtration system is probably going to be necessary long term. I know there's some types of plants that you can add into the water, and actually having the oxygen in the water helps to keep the water very, very clear. But for example, if you're growing an alocasia in this way and you need to have it close to a window, anytime sunlight hits that environment, it's going to start to get quite green and algae is going to start to build up. And obviously you can do regular water changes and stuff like that. But if you're looking to create a lower maintenance space, then a filtration system is probably the best way forward, I would say. Or if you want to kind of add some animal life into it, obviously you could get like some water snails or something like that. My mum's had water snails actually in her goldfish tank, but I've never personally owned water snails, but I have owned snails, giant African land snails, and I can tell you that snails breed incredibly quickly. So I would proceed with caution if this is your method of filtration, because you might introduce 2, and if it's anything like my giant African land snails, you might end up with 605 of them. But yes, definitely something to think about. And having a little space that's not just alive with greenery, but alive with animals as well is really, really lovely. I would also encourage you, if you are going to add animals into any kind of space, to think very carefully about the space that you're choosing. Don't just add them in for the sake of being purposeful. Also be aware of the fact that you're introducing a life and you want that life to be happy. But again, just having a look on Pinterest, just some aquascapes, people have just created beautiful bowls that are kind of sitting on dining tables or something like that. Again, that's what we had, or something very similar is what we had in our Malvern show garden, with a little filtration system that just ran very gently. It didn't sound like a machine was running, it just sounded very peaceful and you could just hear a little trickle of water. Obviously, the most simple way of creating water growing in your space is just by growing hydroponically. As I say, things like Monstera, you can grow hydroponically. Peace lily, I mean, you can grow pretty much any plant hydroponically, but long term, things like Monstera does very, very well. Spathiphyllum, peace lilies, they do amazingly well. I've seen those go for years and years and years and years and years in hydroponic setups. Dieffenbachia, certain types of Dracaena, like lucky bamboo. I've had my little bamboo cutting growing in water, oh my goodness, for years, and it's happy as anything. But again, if you do grow these things in high light, you might notice you're having to change the water every few weeks or so to stop it from going green. Personally, with things like my bamboo, I grow that in quite a low light spot because it is a very, very low light plant, meaning that I only change its water when the water runs out. It doesn't look green. I can see it from here. I'll put a clip on the screen. It doesn't look green even now, and I haven't topped up that water for probably 4 or 5 months. Another practical thing to consider, obviously, when you are growing hydroponically is adding in some kind of fertilizer that is hydro-compatible, because not every single houseplant fertilizer you pick up and add into a soil mix is going to be compatible with hydroponics as well. So yeah, do a little bit of research into that before you go out and buy your fertilizer. But yeah, I think it's really effective. I think it looks beautiful. And again, I actually had ideas for doing this in a big kind of terrarium setup. And I believe, in fact, let's go on to that point and then I'll come back to the other one. The next one on my list was terrariums / cloches because it fits in quite nicely. Obviously, pretty much all of us know what a terrarium is, and you might think you know exactly what a terrarium looks like, but terrariums can come in all shapes, sizes, styles, cloches as well, which are basically just kind of like lift off pieces of glass that you can put over plants to either protect them, to increase their humidity levels. There's just so many uses for these things that can also, again, just feel like beautiful little pieces of art around your home. And of course you can just do, like, you could do a terrarium in an old jam jar. It can be super, super simple, but then you can also do big cabinet setups. And I have been wanting and talking about turning my IKEA cabinet into a big closed terrarium for a really long time now. I said I was going to do it before the babies arrive. Is that going to happen? I think it's highly unlikely. But that cabinet is staying put, and I will at some point transform it into a big, big terrarium because I just think it would look amazing. And before I go into a deep dive on terrariums, cloches, I just wanted to say that this is somewhere that you can add in little water features as well. I've seen people do it in cabinet setups and it looks phenomenal. And also a lot of the time means that you don't then need to have misting systems or anything else in place to raise the humidity in a really big space because the water will just naturally raise the humidity for you. So perhaps that is what I will do at some point. It's what I'd love to do. It's just energy dependent. But terrariums. As I say, it is almost like having a little piece of art. They are like miniature little worlds that just draw your eye in and kind of encourage you to look closer. So, for example, if you've got a plant that you absolutely love, but it's only that big, like a jewel orchid, for example, by placing it in a terrarium setup, it actually kind of elevates that plant in the same way as it might do if you were like looking at a framed picture. I think anything with glass kind of, I don't know, it makes you feel like you should look at it. I think grouping lots of terrariums together as well, as per a lot of the pictures we're seeing here, it just feels very intentional, but in a very unpolished way. Like, I don't know, I feel like grouping them together, it doesn't feel placed, but it still feels natural, but it also feels like something you should look at, you know? But then obviously you can get super creative. I've already spoken about like transforming cabinet setups of all sorts. I'm looking at one here, which actually almost looks like, I mean, it could just be a vintage kind of thrifted display cabinet or like a record cabinet or something, but it looks absolutely amazing. And anything you see like this can, like anything you stumble across can be turned into a terrarium. Obviously, if it is like this one and it's got wood on the bottom, it's really important to make sure that you seal that wood if you're going to be setting it up as kind of like a layered terrarium space, which if you're doing a tropical terrarium, would personally recommend you do. I would probably lay some kind of like plastic sheeting or something very watertight to protect that wood, because even a little bit of damp over time is probably going to lead it to rot. But yeah, just a basic setup like that. There's, again, I've already spoken about Ben Worcester Terrariums. Go look him up. He will answer all of your questions on specific terrarium building. But if I was to do something like this, I would personally start with a layer of semi-hydroponics. That would either be something like fluval stratum, which you can use in a fish tank, or just like a semi-hydroponic mix that I use for my plants, like pumice, lava rock, leca, something like that, and use that as my base layer. And it would obviously depend on the plants. For example, if you were setting up a terrarium for African violets, for example, which I'm not sure that would actually be the best idea, but you might go with something a little bit more acidic in your soil. But I would use my standard base mix topped with something like sphagnum moss to really kind of allow the roots of the plants to kind of get right in and attach on and allow the moss to grow and all that jazz. It can be really, really simple. And I've made so many terrariums over the years using this setup, and typically they've all done really well. A lot of them are still going. And in theory, they can kind of keep going and going and going and going. The other thing that you'll want to do if you're setting up something like a cabinet or something you've thrifted and you want to make it planty is get yourself some aquarium silicone and make sure you seal the whole thing before doing anything else, because if there's any gaps or anything like that, it's going to mean that it dries out, and that's then going to become a much more high maintenance space for you to stay on top of. And the point of a closed terrarium is that you should, in theory, hardly ever have to do anything to keep it happy. It will just kind of look after itself. We actually put a terrarium in the nursery recently. We've been decorating the nursery and making it all lovely. And we made that terrarium probably 3.5 years ago, me and Ross. We went through a phase of creating terrarium spaces like after movies that we loved and TV series that we loved. We made one inspired by The Last of Us. Don't know if any of you guys have seen that show, but we made this kind of like slatey road running through the middle, and then we painted Joel and Ellie, and it was really fun. It was so fun. And I made a fairy one and built it up with rocks at the back. And they've just kept growing and growing, and we've had to do nothing to them at all. And something interesting that I found out when I was researching for this video is that terrariums have actually been a design staple since the Victorian era, which is really crazy. It makes sense. It's a beautiful way of bringing nature indoors and keeping it in a space that you don't really have to do anything to. And it feels very purposeful, you know? So I've spoken a lot about closed terrariums, but also, of course, you can have open terrariums, which typically are used for plants that don't enjoy high levels of humidity, such as cacti and succulents. They can be really great ways of protecting very spiky plants. So again, if you've got a lovely euphorbia, but you've got pets that might brush up against it or little fingers that might poke it, then actually putting it in an open terrarium can look gorgeous and just be that kind of protective layer that you need. I've seen people do this as well, both open and closed, with coffee tables. And there's actually one that I've got a picture of here that looks amazing. If you do it as a closed setup, obviously most people would choose to have the open/closed elements on the side of the coffee table so that you can still put stuff on top. But again, what a beautiful low maintenance space that also gives that beautiful planty vibe, but without you having to do too much. And also, if you've got a coffee table that you want to be planty, but you don't want to put stuff in the middle of, it's just a really cool idea. Another idea that I loved and saved was a lamp terrarium. I saw several examples of this on Pinterest where people had obviously just got a lamp with a glass base and built these beautiful tropical terrariums. If you then also use an LED light bulb in the lamp above, that can technically act as a grow light for those plants as well, because it's being used in such close proximity. You don't need to buy like a specialised grow bulb in order to do this. So it can be multifunctional, which I think is super, super cool. And the last thing I will say on terrariums as well is that they just make fantastic gifts. When I was first starting to kind of play about with terrariums, and like I said at the beginning of this, kind of make them out of old jam jars and just like recycled objects that I have around the house, I gave so many as presents to friends for birthdays. I just tied a little ribbon on them. I'd write a little bit about each plant that was in there, and people absolutely loved them. So they're just a really lovely, planty, creative thing that you can not only style your own home with, but you can also allow your friends to style their homes with as well. And then going back up to the one that I skipped before, this might be, again, a super obvious one, but it's one that I just really want to highlight, and that is hanging and trailing plants. Something that I've spoken about so much over the years, something that I use in all sorts of ways in my own home, not only just in my planty space, but to style my home in lots of other places around the house, just because it really helps to bring a lovely jungly element without getting in the way. And I think that is like a key point for hanging plants, is that, again, if you have got a smaller space and you want it to feel really, really planty, but you're like, I don't have room for all of these big plants, cool, hang them. Like, put hangers in the ceiling. There's also lots of renter-friendly options if you don't want to drill. There's like suspension rods and stuff like that, which are fantastic. I used to use them all the time in my old flat. And that just allows your space to feel really, really green and full of plants in the same way as it would if you were to kind of put them everywhere, but you don't have to put them everywhere. You don't have to compromise any of your floor space if you don't want to, which is really awesome. Also, if you do want to just make your house, make your space, whatever it is you're styling, just feel like that level up planty, I always think just having things on different levels in general just really helps to give that vibe. If you have everything on one level on the floor, although it's nice to be able to look down at it and kind of appreciate it, I don't know, it doesn't feel as jungly because your eye isn't meeting it from all different levels, you know? It's the same reason why we use plant stands, and the same reason why techniques like stair styling and stuff like that works, because having things on different levels just adds that bit of intrigue and like interest to a space. But I can see people that have like hung them off beams and stuff like that, hung them off curtain rails, and I just think it looks so pretty. There's one picture here where someone has hung loads of trailing plants in front of their window. And again, I think if you don't have, or you don't want to have curtains, it's just a really nice way to kind of give that curtain effect without having to hang a heavy piece of material there. And I've said it before as well, but if you have got a view outside your window that you're not a massive fan of, actually having a little bit of greenery in that window space can almost trick your brain into thinking that it's more green outside than it actually is. For example, if you have watched my older videos when I was living in my flat, I loved my flat so much. It was so lovely, but I had this big old industrial estate right outside my balcony that really didn't look very nice. Like, my view there was not the best. And so I put loads and loads of plants in the windows so that when I looked towards my windows, it almost felt like I was looking at greenery outdoors and kind of bridging the gap between the outdoors and the in. So it didn't feel like a concrete jungle, you know? The other thing I really love is just that canopy effect. And again, I think that's why you get the jungle vibe from it. I've seen people using like trellises on the ceiling to create that, and either hanging plants directly from that or having them kind of climb through and create that lovely canopy. Again, there's a picture here of a ladder with plants hanging off it. That's another thing that I really want to do in my space at some point. Again, I've got the ceiling space just above me here that is not being used for anything practical at the moment. And again, it's going to be a future project, but what I would really love to do is create a pulley system for like a vintage wooden ladder. Again, wood using the natural elements. I'd like to get a vintage wooden ladder, and I'd like to create a little pulley system, meaning that I can just pull the entire ladder up and down, and then I can hang plants from all of the rungs on the ladder, very similarly to how this person's done here. And then I can enjoy a beautiful green canopy, but then the ease of practicality, being able to lower it down to water everything, I just think would be great. Again, I know I've also spoken a lot about like the plant toxicity and things to think about in regards to pets, children, all that jazz. Obviously, hanging plants is just a really fantastic way to raise your toxic plants up and still be able to have them. I think a lot of the time people think that you can't have toxic plants in your home if you have pets or children present. And although, like, if you do decide to not have that and just purely have non-toxic stuff, totally fine, do what works for you. I think it's always important to remember that a lot of the plants we encounter just out and about on a daily basis, if you go to your local park, for example, are just as toxic as some of the plants that we consider tropical houseplants. So yeah, just finding ways in which you can practically keep those plants, but in a safe way. Terrariums and cloches are also another very good point. I didn't touch on that in that point. But yeah, as I say, incorporating elements that we have already discussed. I can see another driftwood piece here where someone has hung, in fact, this is a few, they've kind of hung open terrariums from the driftwood, and that just looks so effective and so gorgeous. And it's so unusual and something that, again, is very specific to very specific to you. It's not something you can just go out and buy and there'll be lots exactly the same. It's like that individuality aspect of it that I really enjoy. Again, just looking at this macrame hanger here that someone, I believe, has used for herbs in their kitchen. This is just a multi-leveled system, a way of just kind of growing lots of things upright, not blocking too much of the natural light because it's all done, as I say, in an upright fashion, but also not taking up any space on the windowsills. So again, just such a great space saver. Looks lovely, incredibly practical. Again, when it comes to things like hangers, they are super, super, super easy to make yourself. I know some of these macrame hangers can be very fancy and very pretty, but also very expensive. And if you do want to give a go at just like doing it yourself, I don't do macrame, and I figured out how to do it pretty easily. I did make a full step-by-step tutorial video on it a few years ago, so I'll link that down below. But yeah, you could use the same principle to do a multi-tiered level kind of hanger like this. You can kind of adapt it in whichever way you would like. So yeah, as I say, I'll link it. But if I had to give you just a few plants that I think are amazing for hanging or trailing, I have made full videos on this, kind of taking you through big long lists, but right now the ones that I think are my absolute favourite are the Hoya gracilis, which I'll put a picture of on the screen just because it is so hardy. You barely need to do anything to it to keep it happy. It just looks gorgeous and it's so versatile, so adaptable, beautiful foliage. The Lepismium bolivianum, which I always used to call my head of hair plant. That one, I think, again, just for the texture. I know I keep talking about texture, but I think it works really well. That one is quite a high light plant, so hanging it in a window is probably the best shout. And then the golden pothos, just because you can hang it, you can trail it, you can train it upwards as well, which has a very similar effect. If you don't want to hang, train vines to go up. I always train them using these like twist and stick clips, which again I have used in rented properties. I use them in my flats, and again I'll link them down below if you want to. They're just on Amazon, you can get them from there. But yes, then we've spoken about terrariums. The final one, I have just called this one a sense of fun, because I know a lot of these interior designy kind of things that we speak about can be quite serious. I know particularly in the last video that I made, a lot of them were kind of like things you could lift out of a magazine, and realistically our homes don't look like that, do they? Or like most of our homes don't. And personally, I don't strive for my home to look like that. I think a sense of fun is super, super important. And this can be done in so many ways. You can obviously get creative with your planters. For example, I'm just having a look here. There's like a couple of cat planters, and people have used cacti to be the tails of the cats. These are things that you can also make yourself at home. Etsy is a fantastic place for fun planters like this if you don't want to make them. But you can get air dry clay, and you can obviously, if you're like most of us and you don't have a kiln, you can get stuff to varnish it to make sure that it's water safe, and you just kind of paint it on nowadays, which is amazing. Ross, my partner, he makes loads of like polymer clay stuff, and polymer clay is great to work with. You just put it in the oven and bake it, and you can get loads of amazing detail and then paint it. And again, you can use like a resin to seal it, and you can just come up with loads of really fun things. And I think it's a really fun idea to just add a little bit of your personality to your plant collection. Also, ceramic pots and things like that can just be so expensive to buy. They are just so expensive a lot of the time nowadays. And although sometimes it is quite nice to treat yourself to a fancy ceramic, I think just adding a little bit of your own flair and again, embracing the imperfection is a really good thing. Also, thrifting is fantastic for this, because pretty much anything can be a planter. Like here in the UK, a lot of the setup for charity shops is like you'll go in and there's lots of clothes and stuff, and then there'll often be a section that has like glassware and like just random bits and bobs, and that's where I often find like fun things that I turn into planters. Like I got a beautiful crystal bowl a little while ago, and I planted some succulents in it, and it looked gorgeous. Old wine glasses, stuff like that, and use them as planters. They're just a lot of fun. In fact, someone's done it here with an old guitar, and that looks incredible. I've got I've got two old guitars that they are absolutely ancient, and they look pretty battered, and they definitely need restringing. They're up in the attic at the moment, and I've toyed with the idea of using them as planters a few times now, and I just haven't done it yet. But I think the other lovely thing about actually creating your own planters or revamping your planters, like I've said before, I've done with lots of mine, is that you can, again, really make it your own and really match it to your own aesthetic. So, for example, I went through a phase where I was just absolutely loving terracotta. Like I had pretty much everything in like really earthy colour planters, lots of terracotta, and Ross made, I'll see if I can find a picture. I'll put it on the screen. We've still got it, but its legs fell off because I took it to Malvern and it had a very bumpy ride. But he made a little character that was like swinging on a swing. You might remember it if you've been on my channel for a while, but I'll put it there. And again, when he was painting, he was like, what colour do you want me to paint it? And I was like, could you paint it a terracotta-y colour so that it feels like it fits with everything else? And I really enjoyed that. So yeah, I'll put some other just ideas on the screen that I've seen that I think are really cool. Also, this one here reminded me, this is someone that's just growing a Peperonia pastrata string of turtles out of a terrarium teapot. When I was at Malvern, I think they won Best in Show this year, and oh my goodness, I took some clips of their show garden, so I'll put it on the screen. It was absolutely amazing. And I'll put their Instagrams on as well because they are both absolutely fantastic. But one of the elements they did in their show garden that I thought was so creative and so clever is they managed to put a humidifier inside a little teapot. So it looks just like steam was coming out of the teapot the whole time, and obviously very effective for the plants, helped to raise the humidity, but also just looked really, really awesome. So yes, loads of lovely ideas there. But I would love to know some more creative ideas that you perhaps do in your own collections. Do comment them down below. I could probably make a part 3 to this video as well because I'm constantly coming across fun things. So if you would like to see that, again, please drop me a comment and let me know. The next one that I also have very high up on my list is looking at, as I said earlier in this video, nursery plants and plants that would be very good for a space with children. So I'd love to hear some of your recommendations. I'm figuring all of this out for the first time, but I'm very excited about it. And finally, another video that I am planning on making over the next maybe week or so, depending on energy levels, is I would really like to have a look at some of the plants in your collections that perhaps maybe aren't looking so good right now, have got things going on with them, and you kind of just need a little bit of plant doctoring. Yeah, so I will put all the details for that in the description box below this video. It would be lovely to hear from you guys, and it would be really lovely to do more of a kind of community collab. A lot of the videos that I love making, such as like plant chory videos and do fun things along with me, are just not the most practical at the moment because I'm just so knackered and because I can't move very easily. So yeah, I will leave all the details for that down below. But if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, have a lovely day, and I will see you in the next video.
Stay sexy, plant lovers.